The Zarkith warfleet moved through the darkness of space. Like a swarm of metal locusts hunting for their next harvest, Supreme Warlord Krazon stood on the bridge of his flagship Eternal Dominion and watched the blue dot growing larger on his tactical display with satisfaction burning in his 3 hearts. Cirth, the 248th world that would kneel before thee. Zarkith Empire, his intelligence officers had done their work well over the past solar cycle, and the reports made Krazan's mandibles click with amusement at how easy this conquest would. Baby humans had barely managed to plant a flag on their own moon 6 decades ago, and their space presence consisted of a few fragile stations and primitive satellites that could barely maintain orbit. They still used chemical rockets for space travel, like children playing with fire there. Weapons were kinetic and explosive and crude beyond measure. They had no unified planetary government and spent more time fighting each other than looking toward the star's perfect prey warlord. His second-in-command, Sharduk, approached with his head lowered in respect. The fleet reports all systems optimal, and we will reach Neptune's orbit in 4 solar rotations. Krazan's eyes gleamed with the thrill of an easy hunt, and he gestured toward the holographic display showing Earth's pathetic defenses. Look at them, Sharduk, and tell me what you see. Sharduk studied the data with his keen tactical mind, analyzing the scattered satellites and the handful of space stations orbiting the blue world. I see a species that has barely left their cradle in Warlord. He responded, their technology is at least 3 centuries behind our own, and they have no energy shields and no plasma weapons and no faster-than-light capability exactly. Krazan's voice carried the weight of 3,000 years of Zarketh conquest across the galaxy. We will sweep through their system in days, and they will surrender before we even reach their moon. The war fleet consisted of 847 vessels, ranging from massive dreadnoughts to swift hunter-killers, and each ship carried warriors who had trained their entire lives for conquests. The Zarkith had perfected the art of invasion across 247 worlds, and they knew how to break the spirit of a species before the first warrior ever touched ground. Krazan turned to his communications officer and gave the order that would begin Earth subjugation. Broadcast our standard warning in all known languages, and inform them that resistance is futile, and that the Zarkith Dominion claims their world and all its resources. The message went out across space at light speed, and Krazan settled into his command throne to wait for the inevitable response of fear and desperate pleas for mercy. The fleet crossed into Neptune's orbit 4 days later, and Krazan noticed his sensor officer stiffening at his station with confusion crossing his scaled features. Warlord. The officer's voice carried uncertainty. I am detecting anomalous readings near Triton. Anomalous how? Energy signatures that do not match human technology from our intelligence reports, and they appear to be defense platforms, but our data indicated no human presence this far out. Krazan felt the first whisper of unease, but dismissed it quickly because primitive species often had hidden outposts that scouts missed. Send a squadron to investigate and destroy anything that bridge exploded with warning alarms, and the tactical display lit up like a star going nova. Dozens of contacts materialized around the fleet, and not from ships jumping out of faster-than-light travel, but from stealth systems, deactivating evasive maneuvers. Sharduk shouted, but his warning came too late. The first kinetic rounds hit 3 Zarketh destroyers at the rear of the formation, and the velocity was impossible because nothing should move that fast without exotic matter drives. The destroyers didn't explode, they simply ceased to exist and vaporized by impacts. Traveling at 20% light speed, return fire. Krazan roared and watched his fleet's plasma batteries light up the void, but the human platforms were already moving and accelerating at rates that should have turned any biological crew into paste and dodging with computer precision. More kinetic rounds slammed into the fleet, and each impact carried enough energy to shatter shields designed to withstand nuclear weapons. A frigate's shields collapsed, and the follow-up round punched through the hull from bow to stern, and the ship broke apart in a shower of frozen atmosphere and debris. Where are they coming from? Krazan demanded as another salvo tore through his formation. His sensor officer worked frantically at his console, and pulled up data that made no sense. They are everywhere, Warlord, and the platforms are hidden in the ice of Neptune's moons, and in the rings, and even in orbit disguised as asteroids, and our intelligence completely missed them. Shardock pulled up the tactical analysis, and his face went pale beneath his scales. These are not primitive defenses in Warlord, he said quietly. The targeting solutions are too perfect and the coordination too precise, and this is an AI-controlled network impossible. Krasin spat. Our intelligence showed they banned artificial intelligence development. They lied. The battle continued for 2 brutal hours, and the Zarkith fleet managed to destroy 43 human platforms, but lost 37 ships in return when Krajan finally ordered a retreat deeper into the system and away from Neptune's orbital space. And the platforms didn't pursue, they simply went back into stealth mode and disappeared from sensor skies, stood in the sudden silence of his bridge and stared at the casualty reports with something he had not felt in decades of conquest fear. Get me the intelligence division, he ordered. I want to know everything they missed about these humans. The reports came back over the next day as the fleet regrouped in what Krasin Reed made his blood run cold. The humans had been broadcasting primitive radio signals for a century and making noise and drawing attention like prey announcing itself to predators. But that was a lie. Intercepted communications from the destroyed platforms revealed something terrifying. Humanity had been listening to the Zarketh 460. Years they had detected Dominion broadcasts from conquered worlds and decoded the language and studied every battle tactic and learned everything about their enemy before that enemy even knew. Earth existed, the primitive space program was real, but it was only what they showed the galaxy, the weapons platforms around. Neptune had been built in secret over 40 years and automated, and Wetton Krasin looked at the blue dot of Earth still distant on his display, and for the first time in his long career, he wondered if the Dominion had made a terrible mistake. Warlord Shardock approached cautiously. Do we continue toward Mars? Krasin's pride would not allow retreat, and not after losing face before the Dominion. Counsel by losing ships to a supposedly primitive species we continue, he growled, but we proceed. With caution and full combat readiness, and these humans may have some tricks, but they cannot possibly have armed their entire system. He believed that he believed it even as his fleet moved deeper into the solar system and toward whatever other nightmares humanity had prepared. He believed it because the alternative was too terrible to accept, that the Zarketh's Dominion had finally encountered a species that had been preparing for war since before the Dominion even knew they existed. Species that didn't wait to be conquered, a species that made the void itself into a weapon. Krasin looked at his fleet on the tactical display and wondered how many ships would survive to see Earth and whether any would survive to leave it. The Zarkith war fleet approached the asteroid belt with weapons primed in every sensor. Running at maximum capacitron, had learned his lesson at Neptune, and he would not be caught unprepared again. His tactical officers had spent days analyzing the belt and mapping every asteroid larger than a kilometer and searching for any sign of hidden human defenses. They found nothing. The belt appeared exactly as their original intelligence had reported. A collection of rocks tumbling through space, with a few primitive mining operations scattered across the larger asteroids. Warlord Shardock reported from his station. We have plotted a course through the belt that will minimize exposure, and we should reach Mars orbit in 6 days. Krasin studied the holographic display showing the safest path through the tumbling rocks, and nodded his approval. Proceed and maintain combat formation, and I want all point defense systems active. The fleet entered the asteroid belt at combat speed with shields at maximum and weapons tracking every piece of debris larger than a shuttle. For the first hour, nothing happened. The ships navigated between the slowly spinning rocks without incident and past mining stations that appeared abandoned and slipped through gaps between asteroid clusters. Krasin began to relax, and perhaps the humans had only fortified their outer system, and the belt was truly as empty as it appeared. Then the asteroids opened fire. The attack came from everywhere at once, and from rocks the fleet had already passed, and from chunks of stone that sensors had dismissed as too small to matter. Elgin rounds erupted from concealed hatches and missile pods deployed from hollowed-out asteroids, and point defense lasers lanced out from platforms disguised as mining equipment. A Zarkith cruiser took 17 Railgun impacts in 3 seconds, and the tungsten penetrators punched through shields that had never been. Designed to stop solid mass traveling at relativistic speeds, the ship's hull ruptured in a dozen places, and atmosphere vented into space, along with crew members who died screaming in the void evasive maneuvers. Krajan roared, but evasion meant nothing when the enemy surrounded it. In 3 dimensions, another salvo hammered the fleet, and this time from asteroids ahead of there. Positioned, the humans had weaponized the entire belt. Every rock, large enough to hide a weapons platform, had become a fortress, and every mining station was a camouflaged military installation. The Zarkith formation began to break apart as captains tried desperately to avoid the crossfire, but movement only exposed them to new angles of attack. Destroyer attempted to retreat and backed directly into the firing solution of 3 asteroids it had safely passed minutes before. Missiles streaked from hidden launchers and struck the destroyer's engines, and the ship lost power and tumbled helplessly through space while kinetic rounds reduced it to scrap metal return fire. Shardock commanded, and the fleet's plasma batteries lit up the void with purple-white energy. The superheated bolts struck asteroids and melted rock and exposed the metal frameworks of human weapons platforms, but for every platform they destroyed, and 10 more activated, Krajan watched in growing horror as his tactical display updated with enemy contacts, hundreds of them, thousands of them. Humans had turned the entire asteroid belt into the largest minefield in the system, and they had done it over decades, while the Zarketh Dominion remained blissfully ignorant. Warlord? His communications officer called out over the chaos. "I am intercepting human transmissions. Put it on speakers." What Krajan heard made his blood turn to ice. The transmissions were not panicked military commands or desperate coordination between commanders. They were casual conversations, target-rich. Environment today? Gamma sector reporting ammunition at 60%. Anyone want to grab lunch after this shift? Bet you 20 credits I can hit that cruiser's engines. From here they were joking, though. Humans were massacring his fleet and treating it like routine target practice. These are automated systems. One of Krajan's intelligence officers reported from his analysis station. The weapons platforms are AI-controlled, and the human operators are simply monitoring and making minor adjustments. How many platforms are there? Krajan demanded. The officer worked his console, and his face went pale. Preliminary scans suggest over 15,000 active weapons platforms scattered throughout the belt. And that does not include inactive systems that may be in standby mode. 15,000. The Zarketh had walked into a meat grinder. A frigate exploded off the port side as its reactor went critical, and the blast took to nearby destroyers with it. Fleet's formation had completely collapsed and ships scattered in all directions, and trying to find cover behind asteroids that were themselves enemy installation, Stalson made the hardest decision of his military career. All ships in full thrust toward Mars and abandon formation, and just get through the belt as fast as possible. The fleet surged forward, and engines burning at maximum as they raced through the killing field. The human platforms tracked them with computer precision and railgun rounds, chased fleeing ships, and missiles adjusted trajectories mid-flight to strike. At vulnerable engine block, say Dreadnought, took a direct hit to its primary reactor, and the resulting explosion was visible from Earth. Krajan's flagship shuddered as rounds impacted its shields, and the defensive barriers held, but the continuous bombardment was draining them rapidly. Shield strength at 40% in Warlord, his engineering officer reported. Divert all non-essential power to shields and weapons and life support only. The bridge lights dimmed as power was rerouted, and the flagship pushed through the storm of metal and fire behind them and the asteroid belt had become a graveyard of Zarkith shipscape pods drifted among the debris and transmitting distress signals that no one would answer. The human platforms ignored the pods, and their programming apparently included rules about firing on helpless survivor. Small mercy. The fleet that finally emerged from the asteroid belt 6 hours later bore little resemblance to the force that had entered Dove. The 847 ships that had begun the invasion, and only 512 remained combat-capable. 93 were damaged but mobile and limping along on emergency power, though. Rest were gone, and vaporized or broken apart or left drifting dead in the belt. Krajan stood on his bridge and stared at the casualty reports with shock and rage warring in his mind. They had lost over 300 ships to rock stew automated defenses operated by humans eating lunch and making bets, Warlord. Shardock approached quietly. Perhaps we should consider withdrawal and regroup and request reinforcements from the Dominion. Krasin's pride screamed against the suggestion, but his tactical mind knew Shardock spoke sense. They had been butchered by defenses the humans had built while still using chemical rockets and primitive computers. What horrors waited at Mars and Earth? But retreat meant admitting defeat to a species that should have been easy prey. Treat meant humiliation before the Dominion Council. Retreat meant ending a 3,000-year legacy of unbroken conquest. No, Krasin said finally. We continue to Mars, and we will use Jupiter's gravity well to slingshot around and approach from an unexpected vector and catch their defenses unprepared. Shardock nodded, but Krasin saw doubt in his second's eyes, the same doubt that was growing in his own hearts. They had thought humanity primitive. They had thought them easy targets. They had been catastrophically wrong. As the battered fleet set course for Jupiter, and Kraz wondered what other surprises the humans had prepared on, whether any of his warriors would live to see home again. The blue dot of Earth gleamed on his display in beautiful and inviting and hiding fangs that had already bloodied the greatest empire in the Galactic. Krasin had conquered 43 worlds in his career for the first time, and he wondered if this would be the world that conquered him. The Zarkith fleet limped toward Jupiter like wounded prey fleeing toward what they hoped was safety. Krasin had ordered radio silence and full stealth protocols as they approached the gas giant. The humans expected them to take a direct route to Mars, and then, using Jupiter's massive gravity well for a slingshot maneuver, would catch Earth's defenses looking the wrong direction. It was a desperate plan, but desperation was all Krasin had left. His fleet had been reduced to barely half strength, and morale among his warriors was crumbling, and whispers of the human death traps spread through the ranks like poison. Some crews were calling Earth cursed and claiming the Dominion had finally found a species that could not be conquered. Krasin had executed 3 officers for spreading defeatist talk, but even he could not deny the evidence. Humanity had turned their entire solar system into a fortress approaching Jupiter orbit in 2 hours, and Warlord Shardock reported from the navigation station. Krasin studied the massive planet on his display, and the swirling storms and the radiation belts and the dozens of moons. His science officers had assured him that the radiation around Jupiter was so intense that no human technology could survive there for long. Gas giant would be their safe passage, their salvation. Begin gravity slingshot calculations and plot the fastest course to Mars that will bring us in from the sunward side. Krasin ordered the fleet-adjusted trajectory and angling to use Jupiter's immense gravitational pull to whip them around the planet and toward their target at increased speed. They entered the outer radiation belts, and sensors began to register the intense particle streams and electromagnetic interference shields holding against radiation. And Warlord Engineering reported, though we are experiencing some sensor degradation, acceptable and maintain course. The fleet dove deeper and falling into Jupiter's gravity well, and the great planet filled their view screens with bands of orange and brown, and the famous red spot swirling like a wound. They had almost completed their approach when the sensors registered impossible readings. Warlord, the sensor officer's voice carried pure disbelief. I am detecting multiple large contacts emerging from Jupiter's upper atmosphere, emerging from... Krasin cut himself off as his display updated. Impossible massive ships were rising from the gas giant itself, and their hulls dark, and their energy signatures minimal, but growing stronger as they climbed from the crushing depths. Not satellites, not stations, warships, human warships that had been hiding inside Jupiter. How Shardock began. But Krasin understood with terrible clarity. The humans had built ships designed to operate inside a gas giant, ships that could withstand pressures and radiation that would destroy anything the Zarketh had ever constructed. Ships that had been waiting battle stations. Krasin roared as the human dreadnoughts fully emerged from the clouds. There were 12 of them, and each one half again as large as Krasin's flagship, and their hulls were thick and angular and designed like the submarines that humans used in their deep oceans, built to withstand crushing force from all directions. the lead human dreadnought, powered up its weapons and electromagnetic railguns that used Jupiter's own magnetic field as part of their firing mechanism. All ships and evasive maneuvers in return, the human ships opened fire. The railgun rounds came faster than anything the Zarketh had faced before and accelerated. By magnetic fields that dwarfed anything possible in open space, the Zarketh cruiser took a direct hit, and the impact drove the round completely through the ship, and entering the bow and exiting the stern and leaving a tunnel of destruction. The cruiser broke apart, target the lead dreadnought, and all batteries fire. Shardak commanded the Zarketh. Fleet's plasma weapons lit up the space around. Jupiter and purple-white energy bolts streaked toward the human ships. The humans didn't even try to dodge the plasma struck their hulls and washed over armor designed to shed the heat of Jupiter's interior, and the bolts might as well have been flashlights. The human dreadnoughts absorbed the barrage without slowing and advanced through the Zarketh formation like wolves through sheep. A human ship rammed a Zarketh destroyer, and the collision should have damaged both vessels, but the human dreadnoughts' reinforced hull cut through the destroyer like it was made of paper. The wreckage tumbled into Jupiter's gravity well. More human ships emerged from the clouds and cruisers and frigates, and all built with the same impossible durability. Dickerson realized with horror that humanity had spent decades building a fleet inside Jupiter and using the planet's resources and its gravity and its radiation as both shield and forge deploy fusion mines. Krasin ordered desperately. His weapons officers launched the Dominion's most powerful shipboard weapons in each mine, containing enough nuclear fury to vaporize a city. The mines streaked toward the human formation and proximity sensors. Armed, they detonated in a chain reaction of miniature suns. When the light faded and 3 human cruisers were damaged but still operational, their shields had absorbed nuclear fire. "This is impossible," Shartok whispered. "No shields should withstand that much energy." But Krasin understood now with terrible clarity. The humans hadn't just built ships to survive Jupiter. They had built ships to fight in Jupiter's radiation storms and where nuclear weapons were just another form of radiation. Their shields were designed for an environment where his fusion mines were background noise. A human dreadnought targeted Krajan's flagship and magnetic accelerators charged with power drawn from Jupiter's magnetosphere. Evasive maneuvers. Krajan shouted. The flagship's engines burned at maximum, but Jupiter's gravity well fought against them and slowed their response. Railgun rounds struck the flagship's port side, and shields flared and collapsed, and the round punched through 2 decks before exiting atmosphere vented into space along with 17 crew members. Damage reports flooded in from across the ship. Hull breach on decks 9 and 10 and shield generators offline and port weapons array destroyed. Engineering reported in a rush. Another human salvo hammered the fleet, and this time coordinated fire from multiple dreadnoughts focusing on individual targets. A Zarketh heavy cruiser took 6 simultaneous hits and simply ceased to exist. Debris scattered across Jupiter's orbital. Space Warlord communications called out. "The humans are broadcasting." Put it through a human voice filled the bridge and speaking in perfect Zarketh language with no accent and no translation. "Delay Zarketh invasion force, and this is Jupiter Defense Command. And you are ordered to power down your weapons and prepare to be boarded, and any ship attempting to flee will be destroyed, and any ship continuing to fight will be destroyed, and you have 30 seconds to comply." The transmission ended. Krasin looked at his tactical display, and at the 12 dreadnoughts, and the 30 cruisers, and the countless smaller ships. Fleet was outgunned and outmaneuvered and caught in a gravity. Well, that helped his enemy and hindered his own forces. Warlord Shartok spoke quietly. "We cannot win this engagement." Krasin wanted to argue, but the evidence was overwhelming. The humans had planned for every scenario. They had weaponized their own solar system's most hostile environment. They had built ships that turned Jupiter itself into their ally. "How long have they been preparing?" Krasin asked. "No one in particular. Long enough," Shartok answered. "Long enough to build all this in secret, and long enough to perfect it." Another human dreadnought fired, and the round struck a fleeing destroyer, and the ship exploded in a brief flash. 20 seconds, and Zarketh fleet. Human voice broadcast again. Krasin made his decision. All ships and power down weapons and prepare to receive boarding parties. The order went out and across the fleet and weapons. Systems went dark and shields dropped to minimal levels. The Zarketh, warriors who had conquered 247 worlds, surrendered in the shadow of Jupiter Human. Boarding craft launched from the dreadnoughts and sleek and efficient and moving with the confidence of an enemy who had already won. Krozen stood on his bridge and watched them approach and felt the weight of failure crushing his hearts they'd come to conquer. Earth, they had barely made it past Jupiter as human marines secured his ship, and Krazen wondered what had happened to the galaxy. What kind of species built weapons platforms and asteroids and fortresses around Neptune and warships that swam through gas giants? What kind of species prepared for war for 60 years before their enemy even knew they existed? The answer came to him as human soldiers in powered armor marched onto his bridge, the kind of species that survived, the kind that didn't wait to be conquered. Kind that made sure any invasion died before it even reached their home. Krazen looked at the human commander and saw not triumph in those eyes, but something worse: professionalism. This wasn't a victory celebration for them. This was just another day at work. The human boarding parties separated Krazen from most of his command staff, but left him with Shardak and a dozen junior officers. They were transferred to a human transport ship and bound for what the guards called Mars Processing. Kraze spent the journey in a transparent cell that gave him a clear view of space, and he suspected this was intentional. The humans wanted him to see what came next. As the transport approached Mars, and Krazen got his first clear look at the red planet, and what he saw made his remaining hope dimers was not the barren rock their intelligence had described. The planet was covered in domes, and thousands of them spreading across the rust-colored surface like a metallic rash. Massive space elevators extended from the surface. 2 orbital station shipyards hung in orbit, and each one larger than anything the Zarketh had built, and constructing vessels that dwarfed the dreadnoughts from Jupiter by the ancestors. Shardak whispered from the adjacent cell, "When did they do all this?" A human guard overheard and smiled without humor. "We started colonizing Mars in 2024, and real colonization, and not just flags and footprints, and built the first permanent dome in 2031, and been expanding ever since. That's only 75 years. Krazen said. "Plenty of time when you're motivated," the guard replied. "Nothing motivates humans like knowing something out there might want to kill us." The transport descended toward one of the orbital stations, and as they docked, and Krazen saw the Martian defense fleet arranged in perfect formation around the planet. Hundreds of ships, cruisers, and destroyers, and frigates and carriers, all built in Martian orbit over decades of secret preparation to remaining fragments of his invasion. Fleet were there too, and corralled in a designated area, and surrounded by human warships. Less than 80 Zarketh vessels had survived Jupiter, less than 1/10 of the mighty armada that had entered the solar system. Krazen and his officers were escorted through the station and past human soldiers who watched them with expressions ranging from curiosity to contempt. Were brought to a large observation deck overlooking Mars, and where a human delegation waited. The leader was a woman in a crisp military uniform, and her hair gray, and her face weathered, but her eyes sharp and calculating. "Supreme Warlord Krazen," she said in flawless Zarketh, "I am Admiral Chen, and commander of the Martian Defense Fleet, and welcome to Phobos Station." Krazen straightened, and refusing to show weakness even in captivity. "You speak our language well, and Admiral, we've had 60 years to practice," Chen replied. "We picked up your broadcasts from your conquest of the Thresh homeworld, 1965, and been listening ever since, and learning your language and your tactics and your history." She gestured to the observation window. "Everything you see here exists because we knew you were coming. You knew about the Dominion for 60 years, Shardak asked in disbelief. Chun nodded. "We detected your faster-than-light communications in the mid-1960s and realized we weren't alone in the universe. And more importantly, we realized the universe was hostile." She pulled up a holographic display showing Earth as it appeared in the 1960s. "Hey, this is what we were when we first heard you, and divided and primitive and fighting among ourselves, and easy prey for any species that found us." The display shifted and showing Earth's development over the following decades. We had a choice in keep fighting each other, or prepare for what was coming, and it took time, but eventually most of humanity united around a single goal: survive. Krasin watched the progression and saw the secret construction projects and the hidden military budgets and the gradual transformation of Earth's space program from exploration to fortification. You built all this in secret? He asked. Most of it, Chen confirmed. We kept up appearances and sent out radio broadcasts and maintained our public space program and made sure anyone watching would see a primitive species not worth the trouble of conquering yet, while secretly building a military that could destroy us. Krasin finished. Exactly, and we learned from watching you conquer other worlds and every species. You defeated taught us what not to do, and the Thresh tried to fight you in open space and lost, and so we built defenses in depth, and the Varex tried to negotiate, and you enslaved them anyway. And so we knew diplomacy wouldn't work, and the Kelrath had advanced technology, but no strategic depth, and they fell in weeks. Chen's expression hardened. We studied 247 conquered worlds in Warlord, and learned from every single defeat and adapted our strategy accordingly and built our defenses. Where you wouldn't look and prepared for every contingency and waited, she pulled up tactical data from the battles at Neptune in the asteroid belt. In Jupiter, you never had a chance. In the moment your fleet entered our solar system, and you were already defeated and you just didn't know it yet, Krasin felt rage and humiliation and grudging respect warring in his chest. Why tell me this? He demanded. Why not simply execute us and be done with it? Because you're going to deliver a message for us. Chen said. She gestured, and another human officer brought forward a data crystal. This contains everything you need to know about Earth and humanity, and our population, and our capabilities, and our defenses, and our message to the Dominion. Krasin took the crystal with trembling hands. You want us to go back? One ship. Chen confirmed. Yours and repaired and refueled and ready to make the journey home, and you and your senior staff will take this information back to the Dominion and tell them what happened here. They won't believe me, and they'll think I'm a coward who fled. They'll believe the evidence, and every battle recorded from multiple angles, and every tactical analysis, and every specification of our weapons, and all of it right there. In that crystal, Chen stepped closer, and her voice dropping. What you're going to tell them, and Warlord and Earth has 8 billion humans, and most of them have basic combat training, and Mars has 2 billion more, in all of them born in low gravity and raised knowing that war might come at any moment, and Venus has another billion in the cloud cities, and the belt has millions more scattered across mining colonies that double as military installations, and Jupiter's moons host another 100 million. She let that sink in. Every human child learns to fight, and every civilian can become a soldier, and every colony is a fortress, and every ship is built for war, and we've been preparing for 60 years. And we can keep preparing for 60 more, and or 600. Kraz understood the message. You want the Dominion to know that conquering Earth would cost more than it's worth? Want the Dominion to know that Earth is not prey? Chen corrected. We are not the 248th world to fall, and we are a power that will not be conquered, and will not be enslaved, and will not go quietly into extinction. She gestured to the observation window again. Look at Mars and Warlord, and really look at it, and every dome is a city, and every city has millions of people who've spent their entire lives preparing for this moment, and people who can work in 1/3 gravity, and who don't need much air, and who are harder to kill than any soft target you've faced before. Krasin looked and saw the truth in her words. Mars wasn't a frontier colony, it was a fortress, world populated by humans adapted to harsh conditions. The rest of your fleet will remain here as prisoners, Chen continued. Your crews will be treated according to the basic standards of warfare and given proper food and medical care and shelter. But they will not be released, and if I refuse to take your message, then we send it ourselves and attach it to the wreckage of your fleet and send it on a slow boat to Dominion space, and either way, and your people learn what happened here. And this way, at least some of you survived to tell the story in person. Shardock spoke up from where the guards held him. What do you want from the Dominion and Admiral? Chen turned to face in peace if possible, and we have no desire for conquest, and we don't want to expand into Dominion space, and we don't want to threaten your worlds, and all we want is to be left alone. And if the Dominion refuses? Krazan asked. Chen's smile was cold. Then we'll teach the galaxy what happens when you attack humanity's home. She nodded to the guards, show them to their ship, and give them the coordinates. Home and make sure they have everything they need for the journey, as Krazan was escorted away, and he looked back at Admiral. Chen, one last time, you really think one failed invasion will stop the Dominion from trying again? No, Chen admitted. But it'll make them think twice, and make them consider the cost, and make them realize that Earth isn't worth the casualties, and that's all we need. Krazan was taken to his repaired flagship and found it fully stocked and refueled. And ready for the long journey home, his skeleton crew of 50 warriors was already aboard, and all that remained of the thousands who had entered the system as. The ship pulled away from Phobos Station, and Krazan activated the data crystal holographic. Displays filled his bridge with information Earth's population and military capabilities, and defensive installations and industrial capacity, all of it, overwhelming all of it, terrifying all of it, designed to send one clear message to the Dominion: stay. Away the flagship turned toward deep space and toward the long voyage home behind them, and Mars gleamed red in the sunlight, and a fortress world full of humans who had turned preparation into art and defense. Into Shanchakruzen looked at the data one more time, and then, at his remaining crew, set course for Dominion space. He ordered quietly. The journey back to Dominion. Space took 4 months of faster-than-light travel through the void between stars. Krazan spent most of that time in his command throne studying the data crystal Admiral Chen had given him, and the more he read and the more his understanding of humanity deepened into something approaching fear. They were not like any species the Dominion had conquered. The Thresh had been peaceful and unprepared for warfare. Verox had been divided and fought among themselves. Until the Dominion arrived, the Kelroth had been advanced, but complacent, and their technology wasted on a species that forgot how to fight humanity. Was different. Every piece of data in the crystal revealed a species that had survived by being too stubborn to die and too violent to ignore, and too adaptable to predict. The historical records were particularly revealing. Humans had nearly destroyed themselves dozens of times. Nuclear weapons and climate disasters and pandemics and wars that killed millions, but they never quite managed to finish the job. Each near-extinction event made them stronger and more careful and more prepared for the next crisis. When they detected the Dominion's communications in 1965, and they treated it like just another extinction threat to prepare forth. Crystal contained footage from something humans called the Cold War, where 2 factions had built enough nuclear weapons to destroy their planet several times over. They lived with that threat for decades. They built bunkers and stockpiled supplies and created protocols for surviving the end of civilization. Then they applied those same survival instincts to the threat from space. Krazan watched video footage of human leaders addressing their people and explaining the threat and calling for unity. Not everyone listened at first. The crystal showed decades of political fighting and resistance in humans who didn't want to believe the threat was real, but believed enough to start building the defenses enough to redirect resources from war with each other toward preparation for war from beyond. Industrial capacity numbers were staggering. Earth's population of 8 billion included over 2 billion. People working in defense-related industries. Mars had been transformed from a barely habitable rock into a manufacturing powerhouse in just 70 years. Asteroid belt miners produced more raw materials annually than the entire Dominion industrial sector. Vanessa's cloud cities housed research facilities that developed weapons technology the Dominion scientists couldn't match. All of it hidden behind the facade of a primitive species still learning to leave their homeworld. Warlord Shardek entered the command deck with his own datapad. I've been analyzing their military doctrine, and I think I understand why we lost. Krazan gestured for him to continue. The Dominion conquers through overwhelming force, and we arrive with massive fleets and destroy the enemy's ability to resist. and then occupy their world, and it's worked for 3,000 years because every species we've encountered fights the same way. They defend their homeworld until they can't, and then they surrender. And humans don't defend their homeworld, Shardock said. Defend their entire solar system, and every planet and every moon and every asteroid is a defensive position, and by the time an invasion fleet reaches Earth, and it's already lost half its ships and fought through countless defensive lines and exhausted its resources. He pulled up a tactical map showing the solar system's defensive layers, Neptune and Uranus. Early warning and first blood, and slow the enemy down and force them to commit resources the asteroid belt, the killing field, and destroy enemy cohesion and reduce their numbers by a third or more. Jupiter, the fortress and ships designed specifically to fight in the most hostile environment and defended by forces the enemy can't match. Mars, the final wall, and a fully militarized world with billions of soldiers and ships and weapons. Earth, untouched and undamaged, and with its full defensive capacity intact and waiting. Krasna nodded slowly. No invasion fleet could fight through all that and maintain enough strength to conquer Earth itself. Exactly. And the humans don't need to win every battle, and they just need to bleed the invaders until there's nothing left to reach their homeworld, and its defense in depth taken to an extreme. We've never encountered the flagship's navigation officer called out from her station, Warlord, and we're approaching the border of Dominion space in 3 hours. Until we can transmit our arrival. Krazan stood and straightened his uniform, prepared himself for what came next. The Dominion Council would demand answers. They would want to know how the mighty invasion fleet had been destroyed by a species that should have been easy prey. They would accuse him of cowardice and incompetence and failure, but he had the evidence. He had the recordings. He had proof that humanity was unlike anything the Dominion had faced. Flagship dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of Dominion space and immediately broadcast their identification. Codes within minutes, and responses came flooding in. Demands for status reports, questions about the invasion orders. To report to the Dominion homeworld immediate. Telecrazan responded with a simple message: invasion failed and proceeding to homeworld. With critical intelligence and request immediate council assembly. The response came from Grand Admiral Thesh himself: invasion failed. Explain immediately, not over subspace channels. And Admiral, and this information is too sensitive, and I will present my full report to the council in person. There was a long pause, and then proceed to the homeworld, and council will convene in 3 days, and this had better be worth the summons. And Warlord, the flagship traveled to the Dominion homeworld. In a massive planet that had been the seat of galactic power for 3 millennia, Krazan felt small approaching it, and knowing that his career was likely over, but his pride demanded he face judgment with dignity. The council chamber was a circular room where the 12 members of the Dominion's ruling body sat in elevated thrones. Krazan stood in the center and alone, and with the data crystal in his hand. Grand Admiral Thesh spoke first, and his voice echoing in the chamber. Warlord Krazan, and you departed for months ago with 847 ships to conquer a primitive world called Birth, and you return with a single vessel and claiming failure and explain yourself. Krazan activated the data crystal. Holographic displays filled the chamber with images of Earth and Mars and the asteroid belt. Honored Council and I present evidence that Earth is not a primitive world, and humanity is not a species that can be conquered through conventional means, and what follows is a complete tactical analysis of our invasion attempt and the defenses we encountered. He played the recordings from Neptune and showing the automated weapons platforms destroying Zarkith destroyers. He played footage from the asteroid belt massacre and thousands of hidden fortifications turning the fleet into scrap. He showed the battle at Jupiter and human dreadnoughts emerging from a gas giant to crush what remained of the invasion force. The council watched in silence when the recordings ended, and Krazan presented the data on human military capabilities. Earth has 8 billion inhabitants, and most with combat training, and Mars has 2 billion. More adapted to low-gravity warfare, and their industrial capacity exceeds our own, and their defensive installations span their entire solar system. Counselor Vresh spoke up, and her voice skeptical. Are you claiming that a species we assessed as primitive has defeated the Dominion? I'm claiming that our assessment was catastrophically wrong and— Counselor, Krasin replied. The humans have been listening to our communications for 60 years, and they knew we were coming. And they prepared accordingly, and everything about their primitive status was deception designed to make us underestimate them. He pulled up more data. They banned artificial intelligence publicly, but built eye-controlled defensive networks in secret, and they claimed to have a limited space presence, but colonized multiple worlds, and they broadcast primitive radio signals while developing weapons technology that surpasses our own in key areas. Grand Admiral Thesh leaned forward. What are you recommending in Warlord? Krasin took a breath. I recommend we leave Earth alone. An honored council, and the humans have made it clear they have no interest in conquest or expansion, and they simply want to be left in peace. But if we attack them again, they will destroy whatever forces we send. Unacceptable. Counselor Drath growled. The Dominion does not retreat from primitives. They are not primitives. Krasin's voice rang out. That is the point, and they are a military power that has been preparing for war for longer than most species we've conquered have had spaceflight, and they turned their entire solar system into a fortress, and they built ships inside a gas giant, and they weaponized asteroids and automated their defenses so efficiently that humans were eating lunch while massacring our fleet. He pointed at the data displays. If we send another invasion force, and it will fail. And if we send 10 invasion forces, and they will all fail. And the only way to conquer Earth would be to commit the entire Dominion fleet, and even then, the casualties would be catastrophic, and Earth would be a worthless ruin by the time we took it. The council chamber fell silent.